I was sent to these Arabs as a stranger, unable to think their thoughts or subscribe their beliefs, but charged by duty to lead them forward and to develop to the highest any movement of theirs profitable to England in her war. If I could not assume their character, I could at least conceal my own, and pass among them without evident friction, neither a discord nor a critic, but an unnoticed influence. Since I was their fellow, I will not be their apologist or advocate. Today, in my garments, I could play the bystander, obedient to the sensibilities of our theater, but it is more honest to record that these ideas and actions then passed naturally. But what now looks wanton or Sadic seemed in the field inevitable, or just unimportant routine. A man who gives himself to be a possession of aliens leads a Yahoo life, having bartered his soul to a brute master. He is not of them. He may stand against them, persuade himself of a mission, batter and twist them into something which they, of their own accord, would not have been. Then he is exploiting his old environment to press them out of theirs. Or after my model, he may imitate them so well that they spuriously imitate him back again. Then he is giving away his own environment, pretending to theirs, and pretenses are hollow, worthless things. In neither case does he do a thing of himself, nor a thing so clean to be his own, without thought of conversion, letting them take what action or reaction they please from his silent example. In my case, the effort for these years to live in the dress of Arabs and to imitate their mental foundation quitted me of my English self and let me look at the West and its conventions with new eyes. They destroyed it all for me. At the same time, I could not sincerely take on the Arab skin. It was an affectation only. Easily was a man made an infidel, but hardly might he be converted to another faith. I had dropped one form and taken on another, and was become like Muhammad's coffin in our legend, with a resultant feeling of intense loneliness in life, and a contempt not for other men, but for all they do. Such detachment came at times to a man exhausted by prolonged physical effort and isolation. His body plodded on mechanically, while his reasonable mind left him, and from without looked down critically on him, wondering what that futile lumber did and why. Sometimes these selves would converse in the void, and then madness was very near, as I believe it would be near a man who could see things through the veils at once of two customs, two educations, two environments. From Seven Pillars of Wisdom, A Triumph, by T.E. Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia.
I went into this episode, or at least the viewing. I went into the viewing of this film for my 8th or 9th time with a little bit of a trepidation, feeling that I was betraying something. I mean, this sounds fucking ridiculous, but it's true. I have seen this film. I've seen David Lean's Lawrence of Arabia probably 8 or 9 times, always in a theater. It was the first grand epic film that I had ever seen. I saw it in the biggest theater in Arizona, one of the largest theaters in the Southwest, a theater called the Cine Capri in 1989 after it had been restored, in one of the first very public productions of film restoration. This film was, frighteningly in danger of being lost because of film degradation and the way we don't really give a shit about maintaining our cultural and artistic history. But it was saved, and I remember seeing this on a date. I took a girl, a high school girl that I wanted to be more. I took her to see this movie, which in retrospect is kind of stupid, but it made sense at the time. And I just remember being overwhelmed by the beauty and the grandness and the magnificence of everything that I was watching, with barely a true understanding of the politics and the cultural elements of the film that I was watching. I was 15 years old. I couldn't really put it into the proper perspective at that point in my life. But I remember thinking that I was, and I had seen something incredible. And I would go back to it. I think I saw it one more time in that theater, and then I would see it 6 or 7 times over a 20-year period living in LA. Whenever it played at the Cine Capri, and it always played at the Cine Capri, it always played at the Cinerama Dome. I went, and it was a 4-hour commitment of the day, but I was lost in the film. It was sad for me to prepare for this episode and have to watch it on my television in a beautiful Blu-ray transfer, but without the magnificence and the grandness of that curved screen, of that overwhelming and just overpowering screen. A lot of the images lost their power. Shariff Ali riding out of the desert, starting as a dot and slowly appearing on the horizon until that moment where violence introduces Sharif Ali and D.E. Lawrence. There was a part of me that just, as overdramatic as it's going to sound, as overdramatic as it is, there was a part of me that died watching that, because I knew that my LA life was over. I'm probably never going to see this film again in a theater. I'm probably never going to get the opportunity to see something as grand and as great as this on a big screen. And that bothers me. Also, and I think you and I began to talk about this briefly in our pre-episodic conversation. Watching this film after Dune, and I stopped you before you went further with the conversation, but I felt perhaps there's a level of hypocrisy in my viewing of this film and my embracing of this film, while my utter dismissal of Denis Villeneuve's adaptation. I still think this is a great film. I still think it's a grand, epic, incredible film. But I can't help but think that I'm a little bit hypocritically dismissive of the themes and the artistic choices in it. I'm really interested in you and your impression along those lines, because I imagine that it's something that bothers you as well. So that's where I stand right now, and I'm trying to figure out how the hell I feel about this film. I think maybe hearing your perspective might help me understand mine.
I don't think it will. I don't have a deep connection to Dune, first of all, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have a deep, not to say that you do, but I don't have, whatever the depth of your connection to this film is, I don't have that.
Mm-hmm.
Come on, baby, let's cross the devil's anvil kind of high school history with it.
Yeah. Which is a very important factor to see it at 15, having never seen anything like that in an era of Schwarzenegger and Stallone and Bruce Willis, and because the 80s were this action decade.
Yeah, it was a
Yeah.
different. It was a different white hero at that point.
Yeah.
Um,
Much different.
so, so to see more of a classical white savior, um, and and to have uh, to have Peter O'Toole speak to you through the screen is very different than the eloquence of a Stallone, let's say. Um, but seriously, I I've seen this, yeah, multiple times. I've seen it with you. I've seen it on the big screen. We've seen it at the Cinerama Dome, and it is all those things. It's epic. It's a grand film. It's a big film. It has an intermission. Um,
It has a prelude.
it has a fucking prelude
Yeah.
that I imagine if you were trying to watch it on your phone, you would be, you would think you have like connectivity, or you would be like, this fucking upload is so fucked up because it doesn't have video. It's just audio, because all that happens is like the screen is black and there's music. It's a prelude, and um, so in that sense, it's more operatic, um, and and it's got a great cast,
Yeah.
and it's got a great story, and it's got a great legend, um, but it doesn't have a great history. Um, and so, I mean, and what does that mean? A great history, right?
Yeah.
It has a history, and the history is not the legend, and it's kind of like, um, the man who shot Liberty Valance is like print the legend, right? Some people could argue, well, this is not the man who shot Liberty Valance. This is the man who stabbed the Arabs in the back. Um, but print the legend. And is coming off of Dune, watching this, and being aware of these things. Not every time that I saw this, because I don't remember how exactly early it was that I saw this film, but I mean, I think I saw it in my late teens for the first time. Um, mm, and yeah, great film, in terms of the construction of a film, and the idea of Hollywood as a grand, like, Cecil B. DeMille type of epic, right? Um, that has all of the elements of a film. When you think of, okay, this is a great story, this is storytelling, it's entertaining. Some people would probably say it's boring because it's 4 fucking hours long at this point. At this point in history, people would probably think that's, because it is long.
Yeah.
But again, coming out of Dune, I think that conversation and going back and thinking about the history of it, in that fresh way. Again, having been aware of the history multiple times of seeing this film, but still, like there are different points. You have different moods, and for this mood, for this viewing, I think that kind of that cast such a shadow on the film for me. Which I'm not going to take. I'm not going to take away from the film aspect. I'm just there's just more to it, and so there's the history, and then there's the film.
So is it the element of Dune coupled with the times that we're living in, and maybe the wokeness, maybe the cultural sensitivity that exists in the world that we've aged into? Do you think?
Plus, okay, go ahead.
No, do you think that diminishes the film? Did it take away from your original experience of awe? I mean, for me, it really did attack this sense of, am I a hypocrite for embracing this movie while being utterly dismissive of Dune? Because I look back and I think back to what I said about Dune and a lot of films of this ilk, whether it be Avatar or Dances with Wolves, and I'm very I'm very dismissive. I'm very angry and loath to speak highly of those films. Where this film, I think, the saving grace of this film is that where some people would see T.E. Lawrence as a hero, I don't see him that way. And I don't know if Lean or O'Toole intended him to be a complete hero, or if they intended to create a faulted and ultimately, um, you called him a backstabber, which I think is a very understated criticism of the man. It's much worse than that. A delusional.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
But yeah, you know what I'm saying. A delusional white man believing that he could. The elements are there. Everything that I had a problem with in Dune is here in this film. A white man who is somewhat set apart from his brethren, from his tribe, from his group, who is desirous of becoming what he is not, in the romanticized understanding of this land and these people, and that somehow as beautiful and as powerful a culture as he views it to be, he needs to be the one to come and save it. They're going to get their freedom because I'm going to give it to them. I think that is said with an element of understanding how ridiculous he is, of how overreaching his own belief in himself is, so that by the time you come to the end of the film, he is no longer he fulfills his destiny in that he abandons these people, because at the end of the day, you cannot be what you are not. You are incapable of changing who you are, what you look like, and where you come from. But there are nuances there. There are nuances in this film that are not there in Dune. I just I see it as a justifiable masterpiece, but one that is problematic because the world we live in is problematic. I mean, I think it also helps that this is based on a real man. And although there is the dramatization and there are elements of the real story that are left out, and there are elements of the story that are created, and there are characters in the story that are composites of different characters and time shifts and all of that. But the gist of the story is a white man who goes to the desert believing that he can unify the tribes, does so to a degree.
He's sent there with that purpose. He is a spy.
He is a spy, yes.
The saving grace of this white savior film is that it's a better film than all of those other films that you talked about. Why is it a better film? Because it has all, and we can get into that a little bit down the road.
But that's the problem with that is that you and I are definitely in the minority. With all understanding of that word, we are in the minority in our opinion on Dune. I mean, Steven Spielberg has come out praising it in such a way as to say it's the greatest science fiction film ever made. I don't know what fucking movie he saw, because I still live in a world with Blade Runner.
Wait, hold on, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I'm sorry to derail your thinking. I didn't mean to bomb that track.
Let me call you back. Hold on.
Okay.
Let me call you back. Let me call you back. Give me like a week.
Yeah.
you said that he said
Yes.
that
Yes.
that Dune is the greatest.
Dune
That
2.
Villeneuve's Dune is the Dune 2
Mm-hmm.
is the greatest science fiction film ever made.
Yes.
And you're not making this. You're
I
not
am
like
not
putting my
making
leg.
this up. You can go to the AV Club
Um,
on
we're
the
still in
net.
March. It's not April 1st yet, is
No,
it?
it's not. No, it's not. I wouldn't fuck
Okay.
around like this.
Um,
It broke my heart to hear that. It really did. It really did fuck with my sensibilities. Saying, "Wow, you're really going to say that?"
okay. I think the best response to that is to move on. Um, so look, okay, we're in the minority on this.
Yes.
We can go into these elements of, okay, cinematography, and
Mm-hmm.
I want to cut this episode. I want to do like, and I mean, we're gonna go back and forth, but we have to talk about history and we have to talk about film. Um, there's a film and then there's the history, and the film is based on. It's not even based on the history. It's based on the history as presented by the person who wrote the book on it, who is the person who is the star, who is the person who is the legend.
Mm-hmm.
So T.E. Lawrence wrote a book, a memoir called Seven Pillars of Wisdom, A Triumph. The subtitle, it's A Triumph.
Mm-hmm.
For all of, however fucked up he felt about it, and supposedly there was a chapter that was cut out, um, where he was more regretful about it. Apparently, the point is that you touched on one aspect. It's based on a true story.
Yeah.
Well, based on a true story, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And this person was very a complicated person, as all people are complicated. Um, Dune 2 is whatever it is, and Spielberg is whoever he is. And just because Spielberg is a great director doesn't mean that Spielberg's opinions are always correct, obviously. And just because we fucking do this to the few and the loyal who support us
Mm-hmm.
and who listen to us, it doesn't mean that our opinions are correct or that our listeners are, or that anyone's fucking correct.
No.
The fact of the matter is that this film, and William Friedkin has made this argument. For something oftentimes to be called a masterpiece, you need time for
Yes.
that thing to be considered that.
Mm-hmm.
Dune doesn't have that. Number one, this has had that. This is considered, I don't know universally, but it's considered as a film. Forget the politics of it, which it's hard to do, but just pretend we can. As a film, based on all of the elements of filmmaking, based on the grandness of it, the acting, the filmmaking, the film technique, certain shots, the cinematography, the music, the pacing of it, the storytelling of it, all of that. It is a grand, great film about some fucked up shit based on a romanticized, orientalized version of events from the perspective of the egomaniac who was there. It's about a spy who went there to do the bidding of the British, who did most likely fall in love with those people, but at the same time knew what he was doing, knew what was going to happen, tried on some level, like on the back end, to kind of like muddy the waters a little bit, but knew that it was beyond his control and was disappointed and probably felt guilty and felt like he had betrayed them, but also felt like, well, this is the movement of history and blah blah, and had a complicated existence and wrote a complicated book about that, but still called it a triumph. And is it a triumph for whom, right? And then he dies young in a motorcycle accident. I think he was 46 when he died, relatively young. And but because of an American journalist, he like became a legend. And so his story outside of the film is already like great. And what I mean great is that big.
Yeah.
So it has all of these other layers that these other films don't have. Avatar, Avatar. The thing that when people talk about Avatar, it's well, this is the whatever the technology and
Yeah.
as a spectacle of cinema alone. Ben-Hur is a spectacle of cinema. This can be seen as a spectacle of cinema, but it's beyond just a spectacle of cinema. Because some of these people they criticize these filmmakers. I don't know if Spielberg has or not, but along like in the Scorsese sense. But if you criticize the Marvel comic universe films or whatever, you can say that they're spectacle, blah blah blah. But a big part of that is these are money projects that are made for spectacle, that are made for entertainment. That seems to be their primary like corporate goal, is to make these things and to keep making more versions of them and expand on them and incorporate all these elements, because they can take stories that are coming out of the comic books, and they can by taking these stories they can just serialize everything. This isn't that type of thing. Dances with Wolves, is it a well-made film? Yeah, it's got a lot of elements of a well-made film. It's got a great cast. It's got good acting. Blah blah blah. Dune, okay, similar, but I think this has a better cast than Dune.
Yeah.
If you hold up the cast of Dune 2, and then you hold up Peter O'Toole, Alec Guinness, Anthony Quinn, Omar Sharif, Jose Ferrer, who are like, and Jose Ferrer is a minor character, but like cameo basically, but like these main characters, Claude Rains.
Got a lot to say about Claude Rains.
These are classic Hollywood actors.
But
go ahead.
But they weren't classic in '63. O'Toole was unknown.
Yeah,
it goes back to what you originally said.
Great.
The length of time. Yes.
Yeah.
So it grows in its. Chalamet
going to be a classic? Yeah. Is he going to be this classic? Who is the probably the person in Doom 2 that has probably the best acting chops in terms of like training, films, degree, depth of performances, variety of performances, but probably Bardem.
It would probably be Bardem, but iconic stature would be Walken. And as we discussed in that, the utter disappointment of watching Walken's character play out.
Charlotte Rampling.
Yeah.
Charlotte Rampling, Javier Bardem, Christopher Walken.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Those people are great in their own right. But as a combination, like this is a better cast. It's a stronger cast. This is a white savior movie, and the idea, at least for me, it was like, well, if we're gonna talk about a white savior movie, talk about the one that talk about the best one.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of how it affected the viewing, you mentioned, is it the times that we live in? Is it I think for me also, it's the aspect of like looking at a movie in order to talk about a movie on this show changes the way, or it adds another level, it adds another dimension to the viewing. Because now, and I think whether that includes movies that I may or may not discuss with you on this show. Just post podcast, like I look at movies differently, just because it's like, how will I or how would I talk about this?
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean, does my opinion of this movie have to align with the character that I play on this podcast's version of that, right? Because I want to seem more liberal or more intellectual or more honest or more fill in the blank of whatever, or more funny, more serious, whatever. It's just a different lens now that like is added, and that like I don't think it can be ever taken away, because there's a certain level of like critique that is there. So this, I don't know that even take away the podcast, what I just said, the podcast. If I were to talk about this film maybe at a cafe with somebody fucking 15 years ago, I'm still gonna probably bring up this historical stuff, because depending on how much I'm aware of it at whatever particular time in my life, because regardless of everything I said about the podcast element is correct, is valid to me. But what I'm saying is that even just the act of talking about it, for me, talking about it with another person, it brings up these elements of like, yeah, great film, what I know about the historical aspects, and that colors it a little bit because XYZ. I never felt that personally that there was a level of hypocrisy. I just feel that there's it's kind of one of those things where it just adds the dimension, where it's like, okay, we can talk about things in the same way I can talk about Dune 2. I can say, oh, I like these shots, I like these sequences, I like these costumes, I like this performance, or whatever. Even if I didn't like the film. And then separate from that is also the fact that like there is an element that, you know, nowadays people describe it as problematic. Yeah, that's there. Does that mean that I'm going to like dismiss the film? No. I'm gonna just include that criticism in the discussion. There have been very few things that I'll dismiss because of the problematic elements around. There's a book, Temporary Autonomous Zones, and someone had told me about the author. A friend of mine had told me about the author and the author's predilection for people of a certain age, and I had kind of forgotten about that, and I don't know, a few months back I was reading the excerpts of the book online, and I started to look at these things, and I was like, I was seeing patterns, and I was seeing kind of like a sense of what this person's interests were, and that really, I was like, I don't want to read this. And I thought the writing was interesting, but I was like, this feels like these elements are buried in this work, but they're popping out, and it's affecting it. I don't want to read that. Another element is there's a band called Death in June, and the main guy from that band uses a lot of Nazi imagery and thematics, and that's one band. And look, I listen to some bands, or I'm aware of bands or whatever that use Nazi imagery. That certain ones I'm like, okay, this is shock value, this is that. That's one of them where I'm just kind of like, I'm gonna move on now. Especially because that person also tends to deny or undervalue. So this is not that. This, I can talk about Lawrence Arabia and say it's a good film, but I'm being honest, it did, after talking about Dune, this did color my viewing of the film. Well, I was looking at more of the history than the film, and in the past I've looked more at the film and the shots. So hopefully, I can talk about the film as a film and the beauty of some of those desert scenes and Omar Sharif coming out of that as that dot from nothing into something, and or to see that ball, that orange ball that is the sun,
Yeah,
on the horizon. And I've had the opportunity of, I was fortunately, I've been, I did an overnight thing on the Sahara Desert. Leslie and I did that, and so we got to see the sunrise, and it's fucking insane. And it is that ball, and the closest that I've ever gotten to being there, which like that's something that, okay, I was able to do it. I'll most likely never do that again. Is to see something like that on film, and you can see something like that on film whenever you want. Plus, I've also had the opportunity to see it on screen, on the big screen.
yeah.
Like what you described in the beginning. Like that opportunity may not come again. To see it on that level of the big screen, on a grand fucking screen.
Yeah.
To see that is like also, and with the music. So I'm not going to take away from that, but I'm going to add, for those who may not be aware of it, some understanding of like the historical aspect of it that makes it like, okay. I mean, and a lot of it is in the film, but there's much more that we don't see because
Well,
it's a story.
and it's a story, and everybody has a story to tell, but the story that they tell is their story. So as much as T.E. Lawrence would write, it's still the experience as lived through by him.
Mm-hmm.
He can report and he can speculate on the mindset of a Sharif Ali or a Prince Faisal or the Anthony Quinn character Abu
Auda
Aldo
Abutai.
Abutai. You can paint these pictures, and whatever he's going to write is going to be filtered through David Lean's direction and Quinn, Sharif, O'Toole, and Alec Guinness, their performances. But you still don't have a full understanding of the world. You have a world that's created from the perspective of the person telling the story, which I don't consider this a fault. I consider it a limitation of any type of storytelling. One of the great things about that, though, is that if you watch the film, like I think there could be a fascinating film based on the Ali Sharif character. This character that you can see the wheels turning. You can see the slow understanding of what it is to be tribal and to change into a politician, which is what he's doing in the film. I think he's a fascinating character, and I this is the first time that I watched it where I really paid greater. I mean, maybe that's the one good thing that came out of watching it at home is that um, when you watch it at the Cinerama Dome or any big screen for that matter, but the Cinerama Dome in particular, you're marveling at the image. You're marveling at that moment where you see the sun rise and Lean takes his time in allowing the sun to come up. That shot has to last almost 2 minutes, wouldn't you say? A minute and a half? It's ridiculous.
It's
I love it.
it's It's long. Yeah.
It's very long. It's maybe it feels like longer. Maybe it's only 45 seconds. I don't know what it is, but you go from the shadow of light over the horizon, and then you see the sprinkling of the dot, and slowly the sun rising until you can see you can see the sun illuminating the desert. And then you cut to Lawrence and his guide crossing the desert, and it's incredible. You see that in a theater on that 40-foot screen, that 200-foot wide screen. Just it's an unbelievable experience. I pity anybody who has never had that, because this is one of the great movie watching experiences that you will ever have. You might not agree with the politics of the film. It might seem dated to you, but there are moments, if you, even if you are not a film lover, if you go see this film in a theater, I think there are moments where you will be overwhelmed by what you are witnessing on screen. I don't think you can I don't think you can get away from that. The grandness of the desert, when you see how big the desert is, and how formidable it looks on that screen. I mean, when you're watching the tribes cross the desert, and they're going across the anvil, there's a part of you that is dying inside, because you know how difficult that would be. I grew up in Phoenix. I know how hot the desert is, and I can only imagine how hot that place is, with no shade, with traveling. The way they say, the camels will start to die in 20 days, and when the camels die, we will die. That's a fucking terrifying idea that that is very clear in the viewing of this film. I don't know of a film that has used the environment so powerfully as this one, where 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 the environment is more than just a character. The environment is an antagonist. It's so overpowering and punishing that you don't understand. There's a part of you that just doesn't understand why anybody would live there. I for the life of me can't understand the mentality of that, except to say that when people are born in a place and it's all they know, you adapt to it. Um, I think a great
Yeah. I
deal of
mean,
that
different
comes out.
people
Yeah,
are different environments.
sure,
And
sure.
yeah,
But
uh,
but when you're watching
it's
that on a screen, like most movies just lay there. Most movies are just, it's mindless. It's mindless entertainment that helps you forget about the bullshit of your day. I don't get that feeling with Lawrence of Arabia. I feel like I'm watching something that digs deeper, both emotionally and psychologically, into what we are as people, regardless of the problems politically, and not even regardless. Actually, when you think about it, um, the problems of politics become even more pronounced in your own understanding of the world that we live in. Um, I remember watching this film, thinking it must be crazy over there. It must be insane that people live like this. And then you start to understand, as you get older, the limitations of your own perspective, because you're a world traveler. I am not. I don't have an understanding of my understanding of culture and different peoples is derived almost exclusively from literature and film. But I've never dipped my toe into those waters. I've never really understood how people live outside of the experience that I grew up with. Um, this is a movie that really challenges whatever the fuck it is that I think I understand about the species.
but challenges it how? Like, what do you what does it do?
It makes me it makes me realize, number one, how small and insignificant we are. Now that's the grandness of the desert, but also how um, petty and how limited we are in our ability to come together and do what's right for us in our attempts to live in this world peacefully. When you see the infighting, when you see that they've taken over Damascus and they're starting their Arab Council, and um, the fighting that's going on, and the eventual abandonment of the whole thing, there's a part of you can say, well, that's Birth of a Nation. That's that
Yeah,
ridiculousness of
yeah,
you know.
yes, yeah, that's what came to mind. Yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah,
it did
they're
to me
not.
as well.
Well, when Anthony Quinn walks on the table,
Mm-hmm.
um, he walks across the tabletop, and it's like they don't even know how to use a table, much less fucking electricity or telephones or um, and um, yeah, and the reality is that like there's a lot more than just, well, you know, that's why Arabs can't have nice things, you know what I mean? Or
Yeah.
they couldn't until oil was discovered, is because um, the the because they come from the desert, so they should go back, because what the fuck do they know? And it's from that Orientalist perspective. It is from that perspective of like, and the film is through that so-called Orientalist gaze. Um, Lawrence is the enlightened Westerner. He sells Arab independence to the Arabs, but not only that. As presented in the film, it's as if he presents Arabness to the Arabs, because it's like they wouldn't even be Arabs; they would just be little tribes. Um, and that's why it's kind of like, I think it's important to go back and kind of like at least do a podcast version of history, um, a kind of like, how did that happen? How did it get to that level?
Yeah.
And it's a long and complicated fucking road. Um, Starting in the Arabian Peninsula and then coming back to the Arabian Peninsula, and kind of saying like, well, and even the idea of like, where the fuck is the Arabian Peninsula? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
these things that people you take it for granted, but it's kind of like, well, what is that? You know what I mean? And it's kind of, I think we need to take hopefully just 10 minutes or something like that, and just kind of go over like, um, maybe less, to go over like, how did it get to that point? Why was he even there? What's the point? Um, and I mean, if you think about it, it's like, okay, well, so if you can imagine the map in your mind's eye, imagine the map where Europe is the center, because that's the way we imagine the map, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the Mediterranean Sea is the middle of the earth. Um, and Europe is huge, even though the African continent, like when it's to scale, if you look at those maps, the African continent is fucking enormous. Um,
Mm-hmm.
well, to the right, if you're looking at the map of the African continent, is a peninsula, and that's the Arabian Peninsula, and it's bordered, it has three sides, water on three sides. So it's the Red Sea across from Africa, the Indian Ocean at the bottom, and the Persian Gulf that separates it from Iran. It's It has a lot of desert, but obviously it has these coastal areas. If you go back hundreds of years to the 6th century, um, on the western strip is called the Hijaz. And one of the cities there was a polytheistic trading post city of pilgrimage that was called Mecca. And it was run by this tribe called the Quraysh. And in 570, a guy was born named Muhammad. He would grow up to run caravan routes, freight, to up to north to Syria. And in these running of trade routes, most likely he was interested and developed access to stories, Christian stories, Jewish stories, biblical stories. When he's 40 years old, he says that he's had a revelation, and his revelation is monotheism. So the belief and worship, the belief in one God and the worship of one God. It's the God of the Torah, and it's the God of the Christians, with the exception of the idea that Jesus is God, if you're a Trinitarian. I'm not going to get into super Islam stuff because maybe if we do Malcolm X, I'll do like some tenets so we can understand where Malcolm X, like when he became, because that makes more sense for a film podcast. The long and short of it is he gathers followers in that city and he is persecuted. Eventually he migrates north to a city called Yathrib. It means city of the prophet, Medina for short. So you have Mecca and you have Medina. In that city, he develops basically a political religious state. They develop a constitution, they have laws. He continues to get these revelations. The tradition is developing. There are wars, treaties with the Quraysh of Mecca. Ultimately, the Quraysh surrender Mecca. He goes in, he smashes the idols. Ultimately, the Arabian Peninsula is unified under this new religious movement that is Islam. By 632, he dies. There's no successor. So you have these periods, this period of these different caliphates, these different succession rulers. The first period is the first four. You have a period of Muslim expansion, conflicts, agreements with tribes, unification, and beyond. In that time period, to the west of the Arabian Peninsula is the Byzantine Empire. So that's the eastern remnant of the Roman Empire. And they're coming out of Constantinople. On the east of the Arabian Peninsula is the Sasanian Persian Empire. Now, the Persian Empire and the Byzantine Empire had been at war, and they had both been weakened, especially by the Justinian plague. There was a pandemic. So in that state, as Islam is spreading, it's butting up against these empires. And so now there's war between this new movement and this new community and these new people that are gathering and these armies. And there's also people that are in certain areas, if they're ruled by Byzantium, they look at what Islam has to offer or what these people have to offer, and if they don't want a war or they're caught in between, they're like, well, I'd rather side with this side than with that side because I'll be better off. And so through trade, war, and multiple other factors, Islam continues to spread. So it spreads and spreads. There are assassinations, civil wars. There's a schism within Islam, which is a battle of succession where you have the partisans of one person named the partisans of Ali. They become the Shiites. Ultimately, they're in Iraq, Iran, Lebanon, some parts of Yemen. Basically, should the successor be elected by the people, or should that person be hierarchical, related to the prophet? That's a side note. Eventually, Islamic dynasties start to emerge. Eventually you get Muslims all the way from Spain, because Islam spreads into Spain up to the Pyrenees, the border between Spain and France. Charles Martel stops it. The idea is that it would have spread further, and there was a saying that they said Africa begins in the Pyrenees or Africa begins in Spain. So luckily in the European centric view, they stopped these darkies from fucking going into Europe. So you get Spain, North Africa, West Africa, East Africa, the Middle East, Turkey, the Balkans, Central Asia, the Indian subcontinent, Southeast Asia. You get Muslims all the way in the Uyghurs in China. During the so-called Dark Ages of Europe, you have an Islamic Golden Age. You have periods of advancement in Baghdad, Cairo, Cordoba in Spain. You get philosophy, law, mathematics, algebra, right? Alchemy, chemistry, astronomy, medicine, sociology. You get the translation and preservation of ancient texts from Greek into Arabic. And then those get basically taken ultimately by priests and scholars in Europe. And that's why we have certain Greek philosophers, is because of the Muslims in that period. Ultimately, the Golden Age starts to decline. Baghdad falls to the Mongols. You get the Crusades of the 11th and 13th century. The Moors are kicked out of Spain, and then here you go. Now we have European colonialism because the Spanish kick out the Moors, and then they're like, oh, let's go to Christopher Columbus, and then we end up with all that. By 15th, 16th century, the Ottoman Caliphate rises, the House of Osman. Its capital is Constantinople. The Arabian Peninsula becomes part of their empire. In the 18th century, there's a guy named Mohammed bin Saud. He's a local emir, and he supports a guy named Mohammed bin Abdul Wahab, who's a puritanical Muslim scholar. Their influence spreads in the interior of the Arabian Peninsula. By the 20th century, you get more modernity and more ideas of nationalism. So in the Ottoman Empire, there's this Young Turk revolution, which is a more emphasis on Turkishness within this cosmopolitan center. And so they want constitutional reform against the Sultan. In that, you're getting the Armenian genocide by the Turks, you get the Greek genocides, all that. By World War I, what happens is that World War I breaks out because Franz Ferdinand, the Austro-Hungarian Archduke, is assassinated by a Serbian. So now you have Austria-Hungary against Serbia. Russia backs Serbia. Germany backs Austro-Hungary. France backs Russia. Germany against France. Great Britain backs France. Now you have Russia and against the Ottomans. In that, England needs to keep access to the Suez Canal in the Middle East to go to India to maintain its empirical interest in India. Coastal Arabia is ruled by the Ottomans, but governed by a guy named Sharif Hussein bin Ali. So Sharif Hussein bin Ali is a person who basically is the dad of Alec Guinness's character. And so England needs to maintain the Suez Canal. And they know that Sharif Hussein has beef with the Sultan. So what they need to do is they need to send someone to continue to stoke the fires of that beef so they can unify tribes in the greater context of World War I as a proxy war to weaken the Sultan so they can maintain their control. So they send in a spy named T.E. Lawrence. So he meets with the sons, and one of the sons is Prince Faisal. That's Alec Guinness's character. So the Arabs are backed by the British. They push north. They take Aqaba. That's part one of Lawrence of Arabia. In the first half. In the second half, they take Damascus, Syria. All while this is happening, there's a back-end deal. Lawrence tells the Arabs, this is about independence. This is about Arabs kicking the Ottomans out. Don't you want your own shit? But on the back end, the British and the French, they make the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which says, we're going to carve up the Middle East for zones of our own interest. And along with that, you also have the Balfour Declaration, which says England is going to support Zionists in Palestine. This is before World War II. So ultimately, Turkey ends up modernizing. France gets jurisdiction over Lebanon and Syria. England backs the Zionists in Palestine. Ultimately, that comes to pass after World War II, after the Holocaust. The Hashemites get Jordan and Iraq ultimately, but they lose Mecca and Medina. They lose the coast. And the Saudis from the interior, who have been gaining power since the 19th century, they kick them out. And now you get the establishment ultimately of Saudi Arabia, because the Saudis control now that part as well. And then oil's discovered, and now you have a shit show in the fucking Middle East.
That was a little bit more than 10 minutes. But very
It's
well.
hundreds of years.
Yeah. I mean, you know.
And it's fucking like, and it's basic. It's a basic rundown.
It's a basic rundown, but it's also a basic, I mean, this is history. One group fighting for control over land to gain power, to control commerce, and to further religious fervor in some cases, but also to maintain political control. I mean, it really is fascinating, because it's so amazing to hear the beginning of something and how it slowly morphs into a bigger and more threatening power. And it's weird, because I'm sitting here listening to, and this is all new to me, because I don't study this. This is not a part of this is a part of world history that I'm woefully ignorant of. I'll say it very bluntly. I don't know about this. I've never studied it, and I'm sure there's more to it than even what you just said. I'm sure there's hours,
a lot. I mean,
hours.
There are history majors going like, "Why the fuck are you describing it this way? You're such a moron."
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Like history people are probably telling, because it's also like what was my emphasis based on the religious perspective of history. You know what I mean? Like, so it's, which I left out shit too. So it's just like, this is just Cliff Notes.
But this is what we're talking about when I mentioned earlier, where these are the memoirs of T.E. Lawrence. So it's one version. It's a Hollywoodized, dramatic interpretation of one version of a historical story. That's why you can't go into a film expecting to completely understand a political system or the history of a region. You get hints at it, and you can take what your understanding of human nature and human history, and you can allow it to inform your personal understanding of the world that we live in, but it's not going to be complete. And I don't consider that a fault of the film. A film can only be so much of anything.
Yeah, it's not a documentary.
Story. It's not but even a documentary is limited in its ability to get the information across. So there's going to be, people will take issue continuously about what is left out or the interpretation of said events. Now, that doesn't mean that those events that interpretation is wrong. It just means that it's a certain perspective.
Because history, it's the idea of like, history is a version of what happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
And historiography is how you critically look at the telling of histories. So looking at the historiography of Lawrence of Arabia as a film, it's like, well, the historiography is like, now we're looking at, this is T.E. Lawrence's version, right? And then you can look at it from the perspective of, you can't even just say, well, we're going to look at it from the perspective of the Arabs with quotes, because at that point, it's not a monolithic group. Um, although there were some aspects of like nationalism on the part of Sharif Hussein, who's not even in the film, um, but very much one of like probably the biggest character in the story, in the story of the history of it, because he's the one that starts the Arab Revolt. Lawrence is not like the leader, but for Lawrence, he is the leader. And for, it's all perspectives. And it's not to say that it's a matter of like relativism in every case where it's like, it's not to say that, well, from a Nazi perspective, blah, blah, blah. But, and I'm using that as an example because the Nazis aren't involved in this. This is not that part of history. This is still World War One. Obviously, they're going to be pissed off about World War One later.
It'll grow into that, yeah. Because everything links to everything else, yeah.
Yeah.
To a degree.
I'm just talking about how in this peninsula, like, these different things spread out. Ultimately, the Ottomans are the last great, that sultanate, that caliphate, so-called, that ends up coming back and ruling this area where all of this stuff started. And then these people are like, get the fuck out, because it's like, who controls Mecca and Medina has legitimacy in the Islamic world. But for England, for the British, that doesn't matter. I mean, it matters in terms of, because they know that it matters to them, but at the same time, it's like for the British, what matters is their war effort in World War One, and they need access. It's all geopolitical, and so they're using T.E. Lawrence to use the Arabs as a tool in the greater picture.
Yeah.
And it's all about, and so it leads to kind of this idea of like how we think of history. Is it that idea that history is basically the stories of these significant individuals, these exceptional individuals, or is it another view? Is history this? And and this is all rhetorical, and this is all because it's all of these things. This other idea that history is just, Samuel Huntington. It's this clash of civilizations, and a lot of that gets pushed around, especially by conservative talking heads. And then it came back up after 9/11. It's like, well, they're going to come and destroy the West. But on the other hand, you have conservative talking heads in other parts of the world that are saying, well, the West is going to destroy our way of life. It's going to we're going to end up with Starbucks in our houses. We're going to end up with Starbucks in these corporations. We're going to we need to get rid of them. But at the same time, Putin is saying that. And they're saying everyone is building the great empire over there that's going to come and fuck us over. This idea of clash of civilizations.
Yeah.
Or is history just a series of fucking like random fucking dominoes? And we're kind of making it make sense. We're making it into this dialectic. And the way we've talked about music, or the way we've talked about periods in cinema, where it's like, well, this happened in cinema, so that as a reaction to that happening, then this happened. And then by the 70s, you had a reaction against the studio system. But then by the 80s, the studios took back from the rebels. And then the rebels started fighting back in the 90s. And we're making sense of all of this randomness because we have perspective, as much as we have. And we're kind of constructing this kind of like story. And it's what we leave in and what we leave out, right?
Well, that being able to step away from a thing and look at it from a distance, both culturally, but also with years having gone by, and then documents coming to light and all of that. But there is a factor that as I'm watching, like when you watch Dune, it's a fabricated world based on existing cultures. So
Hmm.
it's almost as if Frank Herbert and Denis Villeneuve go and cherry pick everything that they. This is why it's a little bit more insulting, is because it's cherry picking the best and the worst of culture in order to tell a story, to ennoblize, to make noble a struggle and a fight, while at the same time putting your fingerprint on something that you can add your own heroism into it. So there's a reason that Chalamet, and then you can even look at the time with with the I don't know if I don't know if the character is androgynous in the books, but I couldn't help but read that in the viewing of the film, in the 2024 sensibility of this as the hero. You and I have talked about this. I think mostly off mic, but in my egotistical way, one of my main problems with that film is I can't buy a Timothy Chalamet leading a people. I can't buy somebody who wouldn't be able to kick my ass, um, leading a struggle. Now with this film, with Lawrence of Arabia, you have an American British co-production, a British film, a British director, a mostly British cast, and an American studio back in Columbia Pictures at the time. All of that factors into a depiction of a foreign world, because it's a foreigner in a foreign land, but he's one of us, or at least by virtue of English being the language that is spoken in this film. And I'd be really interested in figuring out who spoke what in this film, because it's as American films go, would the real life situation have been completely translators? Well, you can't do that in a film, or at least it would take too long to do it.
Well, he
Um,
spoke Arabic.
oh, he spoke Arabic. Okay, so he did. So okay, that would make sense as a if you're going to send in a spy, the spy should know the language in order to communicate with these people. The question though is an American studio and a British production team excusing the behavior? Is T.E. Lawrence ultimately a villain, or is he a flawed hero in the depiction? When you take into account the charisma of Peter O'Toole, who is just fucking incredible in this film, um, does does the idea that he could be the villain, which, as you have described and as I've read the film and as you look at it on paper, it's hard to imagine that he is not a villain, that he does not betray these people. But the way that I watch the film, and tell me your opinion on this reading, because I don't know if it's right or wrong. Here is a man who goes native, as they call it. They even say it in the film. Has Lawrence? Do you think it's possible that Lawrence has gone native? Do you think it's a
Yeah.
matter that he has gone native? He has bought in to the Arab mentality of the film, and after his arrest and torture, possibly raped. I'm not sure. There was hints of that in
Yeah. I mean, there's some people have said that he's also
a
that
homosexual.
he also exact. Oh, well, there's also
There's that, but
there's that. There's was he a masochist?
hmm
Um, there was also, did he make that rape story? Did he suggest it in order to be drama? You
hmm
know what I mean? Because he was drama. So there's a lot. he's a very complicated person, and I think he's too complicated to just be a villain.
Mm-hmm. Well, a villain in the sense of how villains are traditionally depicted. He's not Hannibal Lecter. And I know that's not what you're saying, but you know what I mean? Let's go to an extreme in order to prove a point, I guess. But is he somebody who has
Even
sold
Hannibal,
out?
sorry,
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
hold, I'm sorry, hold on. I'm just saying because even Hannibal Lecter, yes, he's a villain, but even in that story, in Silence of the Lambs, he's helping the protagonist. He's not even. He's like the bad Yoda than fucking than the Emperor. The
Yeah.
villain in that story is Buffalo Bill.
Yes.
But moving on.
No, but moving on. But
So
what
that's how
my point?
complicated it is, you know.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is, um, are the filmmakers making excuses and saying ultimately he is a good character, he is a good man, a complex man who is at fault, but from the way you and I read this film, um, he's a villain. Maybe not the way you don't read it that way, but in the most simplistic and black and white terms, he's a villain. If you put it on paper as betraying these people, or is he somebody who truly cared and bought into the lie that he was telling, only to find that the nature of his culture and you might want to call accident of birth, he would finally realize that he could not lead these people. I mean, he was foolish to believe it in the first place. Anybody who believes that they can go into a place and I'm going to tell these people they have a beautiful culture, they're a wonderful history, and yet they're not living up to their full potential. I can be the one that will show them the way. I can lead them to the promised land. Um, it's egotistical and simple-minded, but
Well,
the filmmakers, by virtue of the history of these type of things, could they be dismissing that and saying ultimately this was a man who tried to give freedom to a people who were incapable at that time of enjoying it?
it's complicated because it's not even necessarily that he was like, I'm going to lead you, because he wasn't in that position, because he was working with Sheriff Hussein's son. Um, and so it's in the movie, he's the central character and he's like the leader,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why you get into these white savior kind of like tropes. I mean,
Yeah.
he's, as I said earlier, he's the enlightened one. He's the one that says, so long as Arabs fight tribe against tribe, so long will they be little people, a silly people, greedy, barbarous,
Yeah.
and cruel, which they keep throwing it back at him throughout the film. And he's the one who says, I didn't come to Aqaba to watch an ancient bloodbath.
Yeah.
He's more civilized, right?
Yeah.
Supposedly. Whereas they're tough and exotic and hot-blooded and
Mm-hmm.
noble savages and all that. When Ali in the film, who's a composite character, as there are composite characters in this film, when Omar Sharif's character says that he tells Lawrence that he's going to go back and tell stories of their quaintness and their barbarity.
Mm-hmm. And you will wear English trousers, and you
Yeah,
will rid
yeah.
yourself of these silly clothes. Yeah.
And even that, um, which is a legitimate critique of Lawrence. In the film, he says, "You're an ignorant man." He takes it to like, that's how stupid you are. Like, you don't even know.
Yeah.
Which and that critique is valid and the critique is true, and it's a foreshadowing. But even critiques they're put off as ignorance because he always knows better. If only he could get them to understand, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in this sense, like in the film, they can either be portrayed as like naive when they trust the British, or ignorant when they don't trust Lawrence Arabia. Um,
But
and he gets to be in. But what? But no, go ahead.
But the character is painted as becoming um, self self-consumed and
Yeah,
egotistical, more so than there's the moment where he's breaking down and he wants to be removed, and he's like, I you're I'm not a normal man. In fact, I am an extraordinary man. There's that moment, but there's that moment before his torture where he's down to 20 men and they're in the caves and he's wandering around and he's like, they will walk on water if I ask them to. And he
right.
goes out there with the bravado of, this is the
Yeah,
power that I have.
walk on water with
Yeah.
me.
And it's hard to imagine that both Lean, Peter O'Toole, or anybody involved in the production would not reach that point in the film thinking this guy has become uh, self-inflated. The ego is ridiculous at this point, and now he's being unrealistic. The fact that he has had success, that they made it across the anvil, that they have attacked and that they've taken Aqaba and taken Damascus. He has proven
Yeah,
time and time again that he can walk on water. And then they do
he's the
that.
Christ figure.
He is the Christ figure, and they do that interesting thing where he's darkened up his skin a bit. They're walking through the village, and what does he do? He walks across the puddle. Do you remember that?
I mean, yeah, there's a bunch of there's him
Yeah.
with the white. There's him on train where he's
Mm-hmm.
like, there's him leading the
Yeah.
when he has his black slave bodyguards. There's the there's he's wounded, but it's nothing. He
They can't kill me with they
he
need a
has
golden bullet. Yes.
they need a golden bullet. He's already survived his so to speak, his
Mm-hmm.
40 days in the desert. He's this is the mythology that the film creates that's already based on his own mythology that he had created.
Yeah.
He's whipped. Um, there are a lot of echoes of the passion. It's the passion of Lawrence at this point. And I mean, he in this film gets to be the hero and the victim
Mm-hmm.
because he's the hero. But even when he starts to get consumed by all of it, and he starts to, we're not going to take any prisoners here, and they start to kill. He's like in the sway of this like killing frenzy.
Yeah.
Um,
Because of the injustice done to him.
but because of the injustice done to him, but it's just
Mm-hmm.
like this is just getting to him. And
Yeah.
when he wants to leave, like the great reluctant hero, no, they push him back in. Even
Yeah.
fucking Michael Corleone, like try to get out of it, just pull me back in, guys. And this is the dramatic structure of that, and to the point where it's like now he's look at all what I fucking did, and you guys can't even fucking keep it together. Fuck. And he gets to be the one who's like betrayed by the Arabs. They can't even fucking hold, like, come on, guys. But at the same time, the fucking British, you guys fucked them. You fucked them over, and you played me. I'm so disappointed. And I'm sure he did feel that. I mean, in the book, I said what I said. I read the excerpt from the beginning where he talks about like the difficulties of trying to navigate those two worlds and how he lost one aspect of himself. But at the same time, he didn't. He says in the book, the Arab Revolt had begun on false pretenses. To gain the Sharif's help, our cabinet had offered. And he goes on and he basically says to support the establishment of native governments in parts of Syria and Mesopotamia, blah, blah, blah. Once he says that rumors had reached the Arabs, that they were losing trust, and that in the East, persons are more trusted than institutions. So the Arabs, having tested my friendliness and sincerity under fire, asked me as a free agent to endorse the promises of the British government. I had had no previous or inner knowledge of the McMahon pledges and the Sykes-Picot Treaty, which were both framed by wartime branches of the Foreign Office. But not being a perfect fool, I could see that if we won the war, the promises to the Arabs were dead paper. He knew it, but he was too wrapped up in it. Um, so I assured them that England kept her word in letter and spirit. In this comfort, they performed their fine things. But of course, instead of being proud of what we did together, I was continually and bitterly ashamed.
So with all that, the acknowledgement that he was a liar, or at least a liar to the Arabs, but more importantly, within the context of a character, a liar to himself.
Yeah, well, that's what they talk about that. It's like truths or half truths. Have people who are with half truths, like they forgot where they put it.
Yeah. Is that the thing that's separate? Is that the thing that makes this a great film, in our opinion? Well, in film scholarly opinion, versus the problems that we have with Dune, regardless of the Spielberg or the majority of critics' accolade, the majority of the critics' accolades on this film. I think ultimately, you're right. It's a better film, but I think the handling of the white savior element is better as well. But it's hard to say because Dune hasn't played out. You know, you said something earlier, not in an earlier episode when you called Dune a trilogy, and I took I had a problem with that. It's not a trilogy because
Not
like
yet. I mean, it is, but it isn't.
it isn't though.
We haven't seen it.
No, because even if it's three movies, they're not three separate movies telling three separate stories. The Godfather, for all the fault of The Godfather Part 3, it is a self-contained story um, that that takes characters from a previous story and the choices that they made in those previous stories in order to tell a new story. That's not what Dune is. Dune is a film that hasn't ended. That first film is a half a film. It's not a film. It's not a full narrative. And the second film could have been. It could have been it could have been the conclusion, but it would not have been its own film. Those first two films could be combined in order to make one film, a beginning, a middle, and an end. It doesn't do that. And now we have this third film that we have to sit here and wait another 3 years for, that is going to conclude that story because the books don't conclude. I mean, these are not this is episodic, this is lengthy episodic television. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's where cinema is going. Maybe cinema is trying to do something of this manner. I think it's going to ultimately fail. But these are not separate films where The Godfather is, where Toy Story is, where even the Rocky films, they're self-contained stories. They're not like you come to the end of a 2.5 hour movie and they might as well have written to be concluded.
Yeah.
But this, Lawrence of Arabia, for its 4 hour running time, they tell the story. You get to the end of it, and you're back at the beginning. You see, it's really interesting. It opens with the death of the main character, and then it's told not even in flashback. It's told as a story, and you see him riding out of the desert. And I think that's pretty telling. When he goes into the desert, he's on camel. When he's coming out of the desert, he's defeated and he's in a jeep. He's betrayed
and you can
everything.
barely see his face beyond that windshield.
But he's betrayed everything that he was. He so desperately wanted to be Arab. He, I think at a certain point in the way...
I mean, but did he?
I don't know. I think, at least in the way it's portrayed, I think he desperately wanted to be Arab. I think he desperately believed that he could transcend his own white skin and existence and become one of them. And it's a brutal realization that you can't.
If we assume that, but if we don't, then it's like, well, I think, look, again...
It's an interpretation of the film, though. It's an interpretation of the film and the performance.
Yes, but there's another interpretation that's like, well,
there's a flip side to that coin.
English. He was always English, and he fell in love with his own viewings, his own readings, and his own ideas about the desert, and its people, and his romanticized view made him embrace elements of that. But at the same time, it was like that character was so into his own shit that and bought into all of it, that he wanted to transcend. Not only, he wanted to be more than Arab, and he wanted to be more than English, and he wanted to be more than T.E. Lawrence. He wanted to be Lawrence of Arabia, which is the best of all of it.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it didn't add up to all of that.
No.
Now, when we tell all those things and all of these aspects of the story, and now you talk about references to other forms of storytelling, whether you want to, and let's take religious aspects of the Christ figure just as literature. Let's just do that, just as elements of culture in the form of literature and mythology and stories that have seeped into the culture beyond just through religious. Now, cinema and these ideas of like literary Christ-like figures. And then you show a shot of him walking across a puddle, or you show, and there are different elements that are like now calling to other elements of culture and embedded in the techniques of the film and in the shots. That you have this idea that they're using ideas as they make the film, as they edit the film. Is Dune doing that? I read on some comment or on something, it was saying that, and I don't even know if this is true, but just even the suggestion I think is interesting, that throughout the film, when Lawrence travels, he goes from left to right across the screen.
Okay.
For the most part. But then when at the end of the film, he's traveling right to left, where and that's when he's leaving, going further into the desert, leaving the desert, going further into the myth, the romance, the mirage, so to speak. And now I'm just extrapolating on my comment. Versus driving out of it back into the reality of like post the Arab Revolt. Once you have a filmmaker if that's true, let's pretend it's true.
Okay.
Obviously, I'm pretending it's true to bolster my argument, but let's say all that's true. Now you have a director who's using techniques in the film to add to symbolism within the film.
Sure.
That's a deeper level of artistry than just having a film that looks good with the good acting, with the good casting, with the good music, which is all that's very hard to achieve to begin with. But now when you have a director using metaphor within the shots and the way that they're shot, and you have symbolism tied to the technique, that's a deeper level of artistry. Just that alone puts this at a higher level to me, at a deeper level of cinema. Okay, so you have whatever reasons Spielberg is saying that this is I don't even know if he gave reasons as to why that's the greatest sci-fi film. I don't know if it has to do with technical. I don't know what he's talking about, but it's kind of like, look at the directors that people think of as like these poets of the cinema. Mm-hmm. And look at how Kurosawa uses the rain and storms to comment on the destructive nature of social relations in whatever period of feudal Japan. Or the way that a character is walking into his destiny, but the winds are blowing against him. Look at the way the Tarkovskys of the world, and I keep talking. Look at the way that they use time within cinema, because they're making a comment, and now they're like, I'm not only gonna show you, I'm gonna use it in the technical aspects of the film itself.
Everything that you're saying is correct. You make an incredibly valid point with these examples. But Denis Villeneuve has exhibited that, I think, in previous films.
Previous films. I'm not talking about previous films.
No. I mean, but
sure, make those arguments. But
okay, yes,
we're talking about Dune.
So, and that's the thing. How can you fuck up so badly with Dune, and how are we the only two that see it? But also, and I don't think we're, after this conversation, after this fucking almost this little over hour and a half that we've spent discussing this film, I am more confident and assured in my recognition of this film as the great filmmaking storytelling that it is.
This story doesn't need, in Lawrence of Arabia, David Lean creates a character out of the desert.
Yes.
It transcends, because it's so overwhelming. It transcends just something that's an environmental feature. It's not in Dune. I feel that Dune is had the planet been a snow planet, I don't think there would have been that much difference. It just would have been you just change everything to make it appropriate for snow.
Yeah.
This, the idea of a desert in Lawrence of Arabia, the idea of being alone, even when you're among these people who have supposedly embraced you, but you still are alone. The idea of what's real, and that concept of like, what's a mirage? The idea of revenge, the idea of all of this shit. You don't need sandworms in Lawrence of Arabia. You don't need sandworms to show how dangerous and monstrous or whatever the environment is, and that if you can tame I mean, that's kind of like how deep that goes, and that's from the book. Is like, if you can tame the metaphor of the desert, then you can tame the desert, and the metaphor for the desert here is the sandworm. This thing that eats everything. here in Lawrence of Arabia, and you see it because David Lean puts us as close as we can possibly be there, is that you cannot tame the desert. You cannot tame the desert. All you can, at best, you can just live in certain parts of the desert. And even the idea of like, there isn't one desert. Like, there are different aspects of the desert, and there are some parts of the desert that are worse, that no one lives in. It's not just the desert.
Yeah.
And so it's the performances, all the subtext of Omar Sharif, all of the stuff that you're watching him, that you're seeing him. It's almost as if you're seeing the actor work on these concepts of like, oh, I'm supposed to, and it's obvious in the character, but you can see the work underneath too, that it's like, at this point, I'm the one who's trying to civilize the so-called civilizer. This is the part where I'm disgusted with his barbarity.
Yeah. Well, I think that's true with the bravado performance of O'Toole, and it's lost on us. Yeah, it is incredibly nuanced, but it's lost on us because we're seeing it almost 60 years later. Peter O'Toole is not the revelation in this film in 2024 as he would have been in 1963. I mean, even look at the credits. Alec Guinness, Anthony Quinn, with Jack Hawkins and Omar Sharif, and introducing Peter O'Toole.
Yeah.
Nobody, I think he'd made one film before this, a small character role, and he was a stage actor, and he wasn't the great Peter O'Toole. He became the great Peter O'Toole from this film. And I don't think he ever had any, as good as some of the performances were that came after it, nothing ever matched this. Yeah. Nothing. But what could? What the fuck could he have done, later on in his career that would have equaled, that would even have equaled this film?
Nothing has, except his fucking prolific drinking and having other legendary actor friends that he got fucked up with.
I mean, there was a moment
that's more known than fucking anything else in his career. If people know who he is, they're most likely going to know that he was a legendary drunk with legendary actor drunk friends.
Mm-hmm. But I don't know if you've ever seen it, but he was a frequent guest on Late Night with David Letterman and then The Late Show with David Letterman. And
I've seen clips, yeah.
Have you seen the clip where he came out on a camel?
No.
He comes out on. I'll forward it to you, but it's pretty great. It's pretty, and to sit there and listen. He comes out on a camel. He's drinking. He might be drunk already, and then he gives a beer to the camel. The camel drinks it. He looks at Letterman and he said, "Is that what you call a stupid pet trick?" And the audience loses it. And then you sit and listen to him tell stories of being drunk with Richard Harris.
Yeah,
and he was magic. I've spent hours. That's not an exaggeration. I have spent hours watching interviews with Peter O'Toole and Richard Harris, and the two of them together. There's a video of them at a soccer match, and they're singing both of them Irish. They're singing old Irish songs, and they're tackling each other in the mud. It's hilarious. There is something about the man that is captivating. And
yeah,
he's slight, and he's not. That at any moment, any of those Arabs could kill him. But there is a level of charisma there that makes this, at least this film, believable. And I think that's something that is my central problem with Dune, and the one that I'll go back to continually, but doesn't exist here.
The character, what you have is within the script, within the piece, you have him continuously. He's so out there that he's challenging them constantly to like fuck me up.
Yeah.
Kill me. I don't care. Kill me. And they're going like, this guy's fucking nuts.
This is crazy English.
Okay, and he's so out there. Yeah, he's crazy, but I'm gonna humor him because like maybe he's onto something because he's so weird.
Yeah.
And so he sets up the challenges himself as a character, and they're continuously. He keeps upping and upping the ante, and they may disagree with him, but then he sets up obstacles for himself as a character.
Yeah.
He goes back as a character to where they're like, I'm not fucking going back into the desert looking for some guy who fucking like that's not what you do. He does it himself. Yeah. Whereas in Dune, he's not necessarily doing that. You don't have that kind of like escalation. And because you don't have the escalation, it just kind of comes to like, well, okay, they accept him. Then there's a moment where he doesn't want to go to war because that's the moment when the hero has to be the reluctant hero. But then the circumstances, as happens when you in story structure, the circumstances make it to where either he makes the choice to go to continue or he doesn't, and then the story ends. But the story can't end, so he has to, because that's how stories go.
Yeah.
He has to go on. So he goes on. And then in this one, he does a betrayal, but at the same time, you get and I talked about this, you get the revenge thing. This is kind of like, it's a soft betrayal because it's so fucking nuanced. So you get a sense of a letdown, but at the same time, because Alec Guinness's character continues the negotiations, it's kind of like, well, this was never really about the Arabs anyway. This was always about Lawrence. And we saw the triumph of Lawrence, right? The rise. And there's not really a fall. It's just kind of like, wow, it's this person so fucking whatever. It's the cult of personality.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's not a fall. There's a realization that he is not the god that he believes himself to be. He really does buy into his mythology. He really does embrace his own greatness until he realizes he can't, and he can no longer do it.
And that's what elevates also the material. And it just take out the history part, which most of this episode has been on that, but the character is much more nuanced because, like you said, is he a villain? Is he a hero? Is he a tragic hero? I
love that. Yeah.
What is he? Is he a Christ figure? Is he? You can't really pin it down as well as you can with Dune. And Dune, you can say, well, he's an anti-hero. He's a blah blah. This comes closer to an actual person because, yes, it is based on a person, but it's beyond that at this point because this is a character.
Well, I think that's yeah.
And the character already was like a character. The real person was also, and he made himself a character.
Yeah.
So there's more to it than I think than Dune. And then there's also the argument, if you're going to compare these films, it's like, I'm going to go back to Tarkovsky again.
Yeah.
Tarkovsky made Solaris as a response to the idea that in science fiction, it's a little bit of a cheat, because what happens is in science fiction films, the star of the film is technology.
Yeah.
And it becomes a way, from his view, and it becomes a way to dazzle the audience with not only the technology of the film and the process of creating the film, but of the technology that's portrayed in the film. So he's like, I want to make a sci-fi film without all this crazy like technology in the story itself, on screen.
Yeah.
and so that it's sci-fi, but it's like sci-fi, like psychological fiction,
But that's
psychological science fiction, um,
what he's saying is valid.
PSY.
Yeah. Well, what he's saying is valid.
Whereas,
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
right, but what I'm the reason I'm drawing this into it is because I'm saying Dune Dune is, for all of the qualities that make it a good, well-made film, it's also bolstered. It's also supported by the fact that it is the technology that's used to make it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the tricks and all of the shit that you're seeing on screen that make it look cool, and that make those worlds look interesting. This film uses technology in terms of like, I think they needed a special, didn't they need a lens to do that one shot of Omar Sharif coming out of the desert, and it was like a one-time thing?
I believe so,
Or am
but
I making that up?
no, I think
Um,
you're right on that. But it's also cameras were melting, and cameras were not melting, but they were malfunctioning. I mean, this is an impossible film to have been made, especially in '63. And I don't know how easy it would have been made. I don't know how easy it'd be to make it in 2024. The heat is
well, I mean,
unbearable. It's brutal.
they would have used all this fucking CGI and all this other
Hmm.
shit to make it look cooler. Um, and this film has the benefit of not needing to have used that.
Yeah,
You actually used the fucking landscape itself,
yeah,
and it used what
yeah.
was available. And if it did use that certain kind of lens, yes, it pushed the technology to use to make or develop a certain kind of lens. It did that, but it's not fucking Avatar using this all of this fucking whole world of fucking like
Well,
bags of tricks,
Avatar is Pixar. I don't give a shit what anybody says. It's
whatever.
basically Pixar, so it doesn't. It.
You know what I'm getting at, though.
I know exactly
Regardless
what
of
you're
who
getting
makes
at.
it or what.
But this is the thing. What'd you say? What'd you ask?
I don't know. But
Okay.
all I'm saying is that Dune benefits from all of the tools and tricks that go into making.
Yeah.
Dune is the best Marvel film.
Yeah.
I'll give it that.
I'll give it that.
Um, is it, the sci-fi thing is different. If we're comparing these just to these things as just films, um, I think Lawrence Arabia is a better film, and
Well,
not that we need to get into that game of comparing
hmm
them, which we have been getting into it. But the thing is that one element is the white savior thing, and it goes back to that. Like,
yeah.
as a white savior film, which is a even even from the perspective of like, I want to make a white savior film. I want to make a white savior film.
Hmm.
I believe in the white savior. Pretend. Um, which is a better film? Then it's the question of like, well, what is the intention? Are you trying, because they're both ultimately, you can say, well, they're a critique of the white savior film, because the white savior ends up not being so much of a savior, does he? And obviously that's the defense of Dune that a lot of people throw out. Okay, now we're going to go the opposite way and say, well, which is the best white savior film that doesn't end up being a white savior? Um, I mean, that depends. This Dune is going to end up being more along the lines of a Game of Thrones, where it turns out to be a nightmare. The person bringing freedom is now a person bringing oppression. This one, the person supposedly bringing freedom, it was just another pawn. Um, so at that point, which is the biggest critique of the white savior? They're different. This one is more nuanced.
Yeah.
This one is more. It's harder to kind of place. And again, going back, is he a villain? Is he blah blah? He's not a villain. He's just. So in that sense, it's kind of like this one has more notes to play with. This one you can chew on a lot longer.
Yeah.
That one is just kind of like, oh, we thought it was going to be this. I said in the last one, it's a white savior with a twist. I stand by that.
Well, I also stand by the fact that when I described Dune as a pretty package, a pretty gift package with socks. I mean, And that,
White Sox.
yeah, White Sox, very plain, very nothing much. White Sox, where Lawrence of Arabia, yes, nuance, an honesty, um, a
It's
level
White
of
Sox.
nuance and an honesty towards a depiction of human beings and our failings, while at the same time looking at the incredible achievements, because there are some of the things that he does in this film that are incredible. And I won't cheat that. I won't say that it's not there. I won't pretend that this is not a man that achieved greatness. But the question becomes his understanding of his own limitations. And I think the film handles all of that much better. When you bring up Tarkovsky, um, everything you said was correct. But Tarkovsky was responding, I think, towards 2001, which, if that
Yes,
was his argument, he was fucking wrong. 2001 is not just spectacle. 2001
but
really does dig
2001.
in. Hmm?
Okay, but 2001 and two sides of that. 2001. Yeah, and I agree with you that yes, it's not just spectacle, but it is guilty of placing technology as fetishizing technology to the point that that's one of the elements of the film that's front and center.
It
Um,
is. It is. I don't know if I would go so far as to say fetishizing. I would say that it really comes down to, can you use the technology to enhance the story? It's the same as with Blade Runner. There's a lot of shit going on in Blade Runner that it could be in the hands of a lesser director. It would be an obvious and simplistic film, but there are questions of purpose, of who and what we are as human beings and what it is to be a human being. And I think a lot of those questions, or at least similar questions, are being asked in this film. And the racial politics, I don't know if the racial politics are front and center, because I don't know what the attitude was about racial politics when this film was made. 63? I don't know how it would have been regarding white colonizers and the Arab, the
I
Dark
mean,
East
but
that he's trying to affect.
it doesn't even have to be something that's. I mean, part of racial politics is the idea of perceptions are so ingrained that they come out without even necessarily you being like conscious of them.
Yeah.
Now, the argument against that is like, so okay, so you can just easily say anything is racism, even if the person isn't trying to be racist. Um, but the counter to that is like, no, not anything and everything is racism, but you can read things in a certain way and say, look at the way that this is
Hmm.
portrayed. Okay, the person may not have intended it, but it can be read this way.
Yeah.
And is it a fact that this person is like putting in that betrayal without even realizing
Yeah, an
that it can be
unconscious.
interpreted
Yeah,
that way?
of
Yeah.
course. Of course.
Um, so all of that comes into play. And in the end, Lawrence Arabia is a beautiful film
Hmm.
about all this fucked up, complicated shit that,
Yeah.
you can read. Some people can say, well, it's not complicated. It's very simple. Like, this is what happened. Um, but there are people who say that Sharif Hussein was the fucking one. He's like, well, he's the one who sold out to the fucking British um,
Yeah.
for getting involved with them in the first place. They should have stayed um, loyal to the Sultan in fucking Turkey. But then some people are like, well, then the Saudis fucking sold out too. You know what I mean? Like, it's all very, very fucking political and very, very convoluted.
It's all complex, and
It,
that's the storytelling. That there's so many different layers. But at the end of the day, when you're watching this movie, at the end of the 4 hours, do you ask yourself, what the fuck was that about? Or do you say, my God, that was beautiful. You're overwhelmed. The politics of the movie, I don't understand because I don't know that region of the world and I don't know the history of that. I learned more listening to you break it down than anything I've ever heard about that part of the world and those cultures. But at the end of the viewing, each time that I've finished watching this movie, I know that I have seen something of both power and artistic integrity, and it's a rare thing. It is a beautiful film. It's incredibly well acted, beautifully shot, but it has depth. And I think a film like Dune aspires to that. And for a lot of people, they see that in it. But for me, it's a pretty package with an empty box. With Lawrence of Arabia, that box is filled with magic, and it comes out in every second of the film. There's not a moment in this film that I could take for granted. I really love what's on that screen. Yeah.
If you get a chance to see it on the big screen, see it on the big screen. If you don't get a chance to see it on the big screen, see it.
Yeah.
buymeacoffee.com/watch RickRamos. This episode goes once again, Cornelius Burrows. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll be back real soon. Bye-bye.